Today we're hosting Ed, and we're going to discuss strategies for seeing opportunity in devastation. But these strategies are going to come through really some of the stories that Ed shares with us. And hopefully, each one of these stories inspire you for your business growth, for you to recognize where you are in your business first and foremost. And so, in today's edition, in today's episode, I look forward to listening to Ed avidly. And Ed, over to you, and a warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Jacques. Thanks for the lovely introduction. Much appreciated. Jacques, last week we talked about what real needs were and how to get to them and how businesses could understand the real needs of a marketplace or an individual salesperson could understand the real needs of a customer and how difficult that was to achieve unless you had a very great repute or a long standing relationship, either with that market or that person. Very difficult to do in new business. So we gave a few tips, but one of the things that I mentioned during the conversation, and it was we covered an awful lot of ground 2 weeks ago, and my apologies to the listeners for not being here last week. I'm going to blame it on a virus which has been hanging around for a couple of years, but fortunately I've recovered now. So we did cover an awful lot of ground, and I'd like to do a little bit of a deeper dive into some aspects of that. And one of the aspects that I talked about was the aspect of people who believed that they understood the needs of their market because they'd been delivering to that market for an extended period of time, sometimes decades. And so they didn't see the need, they didn't see the requirement to go and recheck for businesses' needs. And this might be a very serious mistake. The famous example was Kodak. Kodak were one of the inventors, they held many of the patents of the digital camera, but they knew photography. And they had all of these factories producing film for cameras, and they were in liaison with all the camera manufacturers, Leica and Hasselblad and Nikon and Canon and all of the others, Pentax and Minolta and all of the others. And they had all of the processing laboratories, and they knew what was happening in the marketplace. They knew digital photography was coming along, but it was never going to replace real photography. Well, of course it did. And sadly, Kodak, once the second best known logo in the world, the second best known brand name after Coca Cola in the entire world, anywhere from the depths of Asia and Africa and South America to the centers of Europe, you could always see a Kodak logo, like you could always see a Coca Cola logo. And suddenly they had to fold all of their factories and close up. Now they still have some digital processing shops around under the brand name of Kodak, but it's a tiny shadow of its former self because they believed in themselves. They didn't believe what the market was telling them. They didn't believe that the market actually wanted digital photography. And nowadays, of course, almost all photography is done on cell phones, not even cameras. So yeah, Kodak have gone a long way downhill. That's the famous story, but there are many, many others. There's an interesting story of a company that made the magnetic tape for cassette tapes. When we used to play music or record uh, voice or presentations on a cassette tape or on a reel to reel tape. And this company manufactured the material that was fixed onto the linen tape, which made it magnetizable and therefore could record music or sounds and voices and so on. And that's what they did for a living. And in their research branch, a young inventor came up with a startling discovery. He had found a way in which you could store quite a lot of audio without there being a music tape, without there being any movable parts. A solid state storable method that would allow you to store audio, music, sounds, perhaps even video, without there being a movable tape. This was very revolutionary, but his managers told him that their business was in making magnetized tape, it was not in storing music. And so they sold their, their patents to, I think it was Sony and Samsung. They sold their patents for their project, which was named Magnetic Project Number 4, MP34. MP3. The MP3 device which came out, which now is the only way on which we would store audio or music or any other form of digitally recorded device, was given away for a pittance because the people hadn't read the market. Now let's have a look at some of the markets post-COVID, because those were in the days before COVID even. And now we have a tremendous amount of change that's happened in the marketplace. And I just picked half a dozen types of industries and examined them and thought, what would what would their changes have been, especially post-COVID in this 2022 world? And how would that affect suppliers to them, business to business suppliers? And the first one I picked was just accounting and tax practices. Very simple. Now, in the old days, if you were an accountant and you were dealing with little businesses, you'd probably get a box full of bits of paper once a month that your bookkeeper would process, and then you would convert into some form of usable accounts, and you would give back to the person, and once a month or once a year or whenever you needed to, you would submit the tax. And that, of course, couldn't happen during COVID. And if you were a big firm, you would send out a team of trainee auditors to go and check all of their work and make sure that all of the work was correctly done so you could sign off an audit certificate. And of course, that didn't work either. And so the whole world changed around. Everything became electronic. And now accounting firms are moving into the state, I believe, where in some cases they're saying bookkeepers are now redundant. We don't need bookkeepers anymore. We just feed an electronic stream into a computer system, and that produces a set of books. So there's a profound change there. And if you're selling IT systems to accountants firms, then probably you better be on top of that sort of trend, or you're going to be selling horse and carts against Mercedes motor cars. Not very successfully. There are other changes just in the accounting practice altogether. There's at least one accountant's firm I know that has a virtual branch where the people never see each other. They operate entirely independently of office premises. So if you're renting office space, you might have some changes in your lifestyle there. You might have some changes in the personnel that are required for them if you were um, body shopping staff. That's just accountants. That's a tiny little slice of the market. Why don't we have a look at the hospitality industry, B&B and hotels? Now, I mean, we know they've been decimated by the pandemic, with the lockdown and inability to attract visitors and attract tourists from overseas. They've had an enormously tough time. And you would think that if you were a supplier to them, the only thing that you need to do now is to help them to get tourists and visitors into their hotel, and that's not really your problem. So if you supply them with sheets or food or or whatever their requisites are, that you would know what their market is. But hold on, there have been massive changes in the last couple of years. We have more and more power outages. So, what is the purpose of supplying them with food they can neither cook nor eat? We've had, in certain parts of the country, massive water outages, continual water outages. What is the purpose of supplying them when they can't, with sheets that they can't wash? The hospitality industry, aside from needing to bring in more people in beds, they need to bring in a whole lot of new ways of doing things. At least one hotel, of my knowledge, built their own reservoir and established their own generating capability so that they could continue to operate. And that's not all. In some regions, especially sadly in the flood hit regions of KwaZulu Natal, roads are so damaged and probably won't be repaired for years that it is very difficult to get supplies to them. So if you're a bulk supplier, you might find yourself losing out to a local farmer with a tractor who has invested in a canning plant or a bottling plant for his produce and sells it to all of the hotels in the area. There might have been very profound changes that you haven't noticed because they're in the environment that you're not looking at. Be very careful. Don't be myopic, short sighted. Look broadly, see what's happening all around. Let's take another one, retail. We all know there's a lot of empty retail stores in most of the shopping centres, and that's as a result of COVID. But have there been other changes in this? I'm sure there's been changes in spending patterns because the economy is tight and people have less money available. Does that mean that they should be changing their merchandise or changing their way of displaying or changing their marketing messages? Does that mean they should have better lighting or better training for their staff? I don't know. I don't sell to the retail environment, but if I did, I would be examining all of those kind of questions, not just saying, no, I know what they need in terms of clothes racks and hangers and all that. I've been doing it for 20 years. Maybe there's a different need altogether now. And so we could go on. Mining, for instance, is an area where right now, although mines are huge consumers of goods, enormous, not only the mining material, all the machinery and the physical material of picks and shovels and so on, but also of infrastructure, of locomotives and rails and cable and um, explosives and drilling equipment and all sorts of things, but also they buy tons and tons of very conventional things like padlocks and uh, chains and food and water and all sorts. And of course, their problem has been the power crisis. They haven't been able to get enough power. You can't operate a mine without power. And so recently, new energy guidelines have given them the ability to build their own power generating capability, I think up to 100 megawatts, quite a big power station. And I would be very surprised if the primarily supply chain problem in a mining environment right now is how to procure everything that you need to build that power station. And I'm not particularly concerned about all these other things that I have been buying. So if you were a supplier to a mine, you might be needing to look completely differently. You might also be needing to look completely differently at the labor because of the massive unemployment around it, particularly in areas where the mines are situated. People will be demanding jobs. And in some instances, with factories and mines, they have marched up and demanded to be employed. How do you handle that? What opportunities are there for supply? And it goes further. The trade unions have been steadily losing members over a certain amount of time, I believe. Now, the trade unions don't want to continue to do that because that's the base of their income. So the only way they can keep their members is by showing that they are there to protect their members and to grow their wealth. So they will continue rattling their sabers and calling for dramatic increases in pay and calling for strikes. What opportunities does that give you? Now that's only four. We haven't talked about manufacturing industry, and the changes there are probably more profound than the other four put together. And just look at the changes in the property industry. What's changed there? What used to be one of the most stable industries in the country suddenly is bizarre. You've got giant office blocks that are half empty because people getting used to working from home don't want to go back into their cubicles. Why would they want to travel for 2 or 3 hours a day through traffic or using an unsafe mode of transport? They will resist. And many of those office blocks will remain empty for a long, long time. At the same time, people are further away from their offices because that's been the urban sprawl, and it was okay when the petrol price wasn't what it is today. But now, without public transport, it's a very different question. And so perhaps the property market is going to change from centralized locations to more and more dispersed locations. I don't know. Again, I don't sell into the property market. But there are profound changes, and we've only taken a few sectors here. There are many, many of them. There are profound changes around. And if you're not aware of those as a vendor or as a salesperson, then you may be falling into a trap that you don't even realize you're falling into. And that would be tragic. How do you look for these changes? Well, first of all, open your eyes and think. Didn't take me long to create that list that I've just rattled off there. Some of it is just very common sense. Do the research. Go and look at the Economist's report. Yeah, I know they're boring and they're full of incomprehensible graphs, but they do give you very useful information. Listen to the podcasts where they talk sense about these kind of issues. Read, talk to people, understand, observe, use your eyes. Didn't take a rocket scientist to walk around a shopping center to see what's going on there, what the changing patterns of shoppers are and the changing patterns of shops are, and therefore the changing needs for suppliers are. But don't just sit back complacently and say, I understand my market. You may not. That's all about change, which was only one tiny little section we spoke about last week. Another tiny little section we spoke about last week, which needs an enormous amount of expansion, is the lost business. The lost business that you could have got but didn't get. And this is one of the intangible expenses. Let me just go back to a bit of basics here. We tend to focus on business profitability by looking at numbers, by looking at an income and expenditure account, profit and loss account, perhaps by looking at a balance sheet, but usually by looking at the P&L, and say that's what makes the business profitable. But those are only the things where people send you invoices or invoice equivalents. Those are only costs that go in there. The only income that goes in there is the income for which you invoice or for which you are credited in the form of, say, interest or something like that. Nothing else goes in there. No intangible costs. No intangible income. What are intangibles? These are the things you don't get invoices for, but which cost you large amounts of money in many, many cases. So if we take manufacturing as a for instance, the biggest cost of manufacturing an item is probably idle time, is time waiting for a part to arrive, or time when the machine is not able to work, or something of that nature. Another very large cost is inventory lying around in the store. Now, there's a cost to that. You have to buy it, you have to pay interest on that money, you have to light it and heat it and count it and stop it from being stolen. There's a cost of keeping inventory. And sometimes the cost can be very high. If you're keeping 100 millions worth of industry, the cost of that is enormous. And sometimes it can be comically wrong, as happened to a company that I had an interaction with some time ago, large manufacturer, and they made equipment, big ticket equipment, and they got to be in their bonnet about the obsolete stock store. So every time stock went obsolete, they would put it in the storeroom just in case they needed it ever again. They never, of course, drew it out of that storeroom, but that storeroom was getting into quite a large value, and it was showing on the balance sheet as an asset. And of course it wasn't. It was useless. So they did a project and they dived into their obsolete store and saw what was obsolete and what wasn't. And about 10% of the obsolete store were parts that they didn't know they had, which they were buying brand new now. That included engines, just to give you an illustration of the value of that. Inventory, wasted inventory, is hideously expensive. Waste is expensive. Time waiting for anything, light, electricity, water, parts, labor, is highly expensive. There are some estimates that in manufacturing, 2/3 of the total cost of a manufacturing process is an intangible cost. I don't know, but that's what I've been told. Now let me turn to other intangibles that are around, especially intangible sales. These are the sales that you don't get. Now, incidentally, if those intangible costs sent invoices, the accountants would be up in arms. That would be the single focus of their attention, is to cut those costs. And similarly, if the lost sales sent invoices saying, this is the margin cost to you of you not getting this sale, everyone would be up in arms. But nobody actually notices these. And there's a whole lot of very obvious for instances here. In today's market, buyers do just under 70% of the work formerly done by salespeople in the sales cycle. So they do the budgeting, the initial needs investigation, they do the choice of what's available, um, they do the selection of affordability and all those kind of things, which used to be done by the salesperson. They look at the product, they may even have a virtual demonstration of it. This happens, for instance, with houses very frequently. And then they will choose perhaps a short list of companies to talk to. Now, this raises the scary possibility. You've got a 70-30 chance against you of someone having considered your company, got maybe close to the short list, and then discarding it, and you never actually knew they existed. How scary is that as a prospect? 70-30 against. That you might be losing sales because your website's not right, or your information's not right, or you've had bad reports that you haven't responded to, or you've had rude customer service or something like that. That's just one example. Another example is the well-known sales funnel. So in a sales funnel, you get inquiries coming into the wide part of the funnel, and you get sales falling out of the small part of the funnel, the narrow part of the funnel. And if you're in a very, very good company, you will probably get about 30 or 35% of all inquiries converting into sales. That means that 65% or 70% of all inquiries that came in were wasted. That your effort that went into them was of no value at all because they didn't turn into sales. How many of those should have turned into sales? Don't know. In some businesses, that sales funnel is something like 10% strike rate. 90% of all inquiries get chucked away, never get attended to. How many of those should have been your sales that you didn't get and you probably didn't even know you didn't get them? How many times have people walked into your premises, looked around, not been treated well, walked out and gone and bought somewhere else? How many times have people looked at your online presence and thought, no, this doesn't look like a particularly good company. It's all out of date and it's a bit tatty. I'll go somewhere else. How many times have they been very, very close to buying from you and something went wrong? Someone didn't respond to a phone call or didn't answer an email timeously or was rude to them or didn't satisfy their requirement, didn't answer their questions, was evasive, or something else that went horribly, horribly wrong. How many of those does your company honestly have? And do you know? Because everyone covers these up. No one wants to tell you that they lost a sale because of their own incompetence or stupidity or negligence or just because they were having a bad day. No one wants to tell you. So how would you know? And how can you stop this happening? Well, there's quite a few ways of doing that. And I don't think we have time to even touch on those at the moment. So I'll leave it there with just the thought that, in my opinion, most businesses lose roughly 2/3 of the sales that they could get. Doesn't say they would get them, but sales that they could get that never really feature on their prospect lists. Some of those will be on their prospect lists, and they'll get to being hot prospects, and maybe half of those will close. The other half won't. And then you have to ask your question, why? Why do half of them buy? Why do half of them not? Why do you have a 20% market share who are deliriously happy with your products? Why only 20? What's wrong with the other 80%? Big thorny question. To answer it, you probably will find it difficult to see the wood for the trees. You'll probably find that it is very, very helpful to have some outside eyes on this kind of problem to assist you. And well, there are a couple of people in this clubhouse room that may just assist you to find that sort of an answer, but there are many more good quality mentors and strategists and coaches that can help you find that kind of solution. And I urge you to consider that, because that can be the make or break of your business. You don't want to let that opportunity by.
Wonderful, Ed. Thank you very much. And we're a little over time, but the powerful question that emerges, that big thorny question, is why are you losing a minimum of 67% of your sales potential? And in some cases, why are you losing 98% of your sales potential, depending on what type of business you're in? So you cannot be like an ostrich, put your head in the sand. It is to understand what is going on. And the whole preamble in terms of the changes in your environment that Ed has been talking about informs you of what the reasons might be why you are losing sales. And I mean, the chilling thought, Ed, where your business can shoot off an invoice to you where your lost opportunities, your opportunity costs are now being invoiced to you as a decision maker is a big wake-up call. So I just want to say to those listening to this audio or podcast is go and have a look at what's happening. in your business. In our previous episodes, we did talk about having a look at, when we were talking about pricing strategies, is evaluating your costs and your expenses, your cost of sales, those kinds of things. But in this case, why are your conversion rate so low? What happens to that portion that you cannot convert, and delving into that? And yes, in this case, we're available. If you need us, contact us. Thank you, everyone. Until we meet again next week, Wednesday, same time, same place, same topic of how do you turn devastation into success. Thank you, Ed, as usual, riveting. Thank you for those who been present with us, and until next week.